Hello, and welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. Before we begin tonight's tale, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment below if you enjoy bedtime stories that are a little eerie, mysterious, and keep you thinking long after the lights are out. Now, let's settle in, take a deep breath, and listen closely. Strange lights over the Mojave Desert. It was a cool night in early September, 1997. The desert air carried a faint chill, unusual for that time of year, and the sky above California's Mojave stretched endlessly, scattered with brilliant stars. There were no clouds, no planes passing overhead. Only silence, broken now and then by the distant cry of a coyote. At exactly 11:42 p.m., two friends, Michael Turner, a 32-year-old schoolteacher from Lancaster, and his childhood companion Daniel Harris, a truck mechanic, pulled their old Ford pickup off Highway 58 near Barstow. They were on their way home from a late-night fishing trip, tired but still joking as they stopped to stretch their legs and share a last cigarette before the long drive back. Michael leaned against the hood, looking up at the vast sky. That was when he saw it first. A cluster of lights, bright, bluish-white, and unnervingly silent, hovering low over the desert horizon. "Danny," he whispered, tapping his friend's arm. "Tell me you see that." Daniel squinted, the ember of his cigarette glowing in the dark. "Christ, Mike, that's no plane. Look how they're moving." The lights shifted, almost dancing in a perfect triangular formation, before sliding apart and reforming as if guided by some invisible hand. They were too fast, too precise, too smooth. Nothing like the erratic flicker of helicopters or the steady glide of passenger aircraft. For several long minutes, the men stood rooted to the spot. The desert was eerily still, as though holding its breath. Even the wind seemed to have died down. Then suddenly, one of the lights detached from the group and descended straight toward the ground. It stopped abruptly, perhaps 100 feet above the sand, glowing brighter and brighter until the desert floor was bathed in an otherworldly white glow. Michael felt his skin prickle. "We need to get this on tape," he muttered, fumbling for the camcorder they kept in the back of the truck. But by the time he got it running, the lights shifted again. The single orb shot back up with impossible speed, rejoining the others in an instant. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished. Not faded, not drifted away. They simply blinked out of existence, leaving nothing but the star-strewn desert sky behind. Michael and Daniel stared at one another, breathless, neither willing to speak first. The only sound was the faint ticking of the cooling truck engine. "Mike," Daniel finally said, his voice low, "I don't think we should tell anyone about this. No one's gonna believe us." But Michael wasn't so sure, because just before the lights disappeared, he thought he'd seen something else, something darker, moving just beyond the reach of the glow. A shape against the sand that wasn't supposed to be there. Strange lights over the Mojave Desert. Michael sat behind the wheel of the pickup, his hands trembling as he tried to light another cigarette. The flame of the lighter flickered weakly before catching, and in that brief glow he caught sight of Daniel's face. His friend was pale, his eyes wide and darting nervously at the darkness outside, as though expecting something to emerge from the desert at any moment. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The silence was almost unbearable. Only when the truck's old radio crackled faintly with static did Michael finally exhale and mutter, "We weren't supposed to see that." Daniel rubbed his hands across his face. "Don't start, Mike. Don't start with your theories. I don't want to hear it. I just want to get the hell out of here." Michael didn't argue. He shifted the truck into gear, and the headlights cut across the empty desert road, stretching into an endless ribbon of black. The engine groaned as they pulled away from the spot where the lights had appeared, the tires crunching over the gravel. Behind them, the desert swallowed their tracks like nothing had ever happened. The road back toward Lancaster was long and lonely. Highway 58 at that hour felt abandoned, with only the rare glimmer of another vehicle passing in the opposite direction. The farther they drove, the more Michael's mind replayed the strange display. The movement of the lights was burned into his memory. Not random, not human. Too smooth, too exact. He couldn't shake it. And then there was that shadow. He hadn't told Daniel about it yet, but the image clung to him. The suggestion of a tall, thin shape standing on the sand, motionless, watching. At 12:30 a.m., they pulled into a rundown gas station just outside Boron. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a pale green glow on the cracked asphalt. The attendant inside barely looked up as the two men got out. Daniel went to the restroom, while Michael leaned against the truck, lighting yet another cigarette. That was when he noticed it. In the distance, just beyond the gas station lights, the desert was dark, pitch dark. But within that darkness, a faint shimmer appeared, like heat rising from the ground. Except it was midnight, and the air was cool. The shimmer pulsed faintly, almost rhythmically, as though echoing the beat of some invisible heart. Michael blinked, his stomach twisting. The shimmer was there, and then it was gone. When Daniel came back, Michael didn't mention it. He simply climbed into the truck and muttered, "Let's just keep moving." They reached Lancaster at nearly 3 in the morning. The town was quiet, its neighborhoods bathed in the dull glow of street lamps. Michael dropped Daniel off at his small bungalow on Avenue J. Daniel hesitated before getting out, gripping the door handle tightly. "Mike," he said softly, "if anyone asks, we didn't see anything tonight. Promise me." Michael nodded, though his throat felt dry. "Yeah, we didn't see anything." But as Daniel shut the door and disappeared into his house, Michael knew he was lying. He had seen something, something that had changed the way he looked at the night sky forever. When Michael finally reached his own house, his wife Sarah was already asleep, curled up under the blanket. He moved quietly, careful not to wake her, but his hands were still shaking as he set the camcorder down on the kitchen counter. It had recorded only static, the faint outlines of stars, and nothing else. Still, he rewound it twice, hoping, praying, for even a glimpse of the lights. Nothing. He barely slept that night. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the desert suburbs, but Michael felt no relief. His head throbbed, his stomach churned, and as he stood by the window sipping his coffee, he noticed something strange in the backyard. Footprints. Not boots, not sneakers, something else. The prints were long, narrow, and oddly spaced, like someone with an unnatural stride had walked across the sand behind his house. They trailed off toward the alley, fading into nothing. Michael's mug slipped in his hand and nearly shattered on the counter. Later that day, he drove to Daniel's shop. His friend was bent over the hood of a customer's Chevy, grease smeared across his forearms. When Michael mentioned the footprints, Daniel's face went pale again. "Don't tell me that," Daniel muttered, glancing around as though someone might overhear. "Don't tell me they followed you." Michael leaned closer. "Danny, we saw something we weren't supposed to. What if—" "Stop," Daniel interrupted sharply. He threw his wrench onto the workbench, the clang echoing through the shop. "I told you, we don't talk about it. Not to each other. Not to anyone. You hear me? This ends now. But it didn't end. That night, Michael woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of a low humming. It wasn't inside the house, but outside, above the roof. A vibration, steady and deep, like a giant electric current passing just overhead. He slipped from the bed, his heart hammering, and pulled the curtain back. The street was empty. The sky above looked normal, but the humming didn't stop. It seemed to seep into his bones, rattling his teeth, until suddenly, just as it had begun, it vanished. The next morning, Sarah asked him why he looked so pale. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Days passed, but the feeling of being watched never left him. At the grocery store, he thought he noticed the same black sedan parked at the far edge of the lot each time he shopped. On his drive home, headlights followed him longer than they should have, only to turn off suddenly when he slowed down. Even the phone line crackled faintly during calls, as though someone else was listening. Michael tried to convince himself he was imagining it, but deep down he knew better. Then, a week after the night in the Mojave, Daniel showed up at his door unannounced. His face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Mike," he said, gripping the door frame, "something's wrong at my place. My dog, he's gone. Just vanished from the yard. The gate wasn't open, no tracks, nothing. And last night, I swear I saw lights in my back field. Small ones, red this time, flickering in the grass like they were searching for something." Michael felt his stomach sink. Whatever had appeared in the desert wasn't finished with them. It had followed them home. They sat together in Michael's kitchen that night, the camcorder between them on the table, though neither man dared to turn it on again. Outside, the crickets chirped, but now and then the sounds seemed to cut off all at once, replaced by a silence so sharp it made the hairs on their arms stand up. Michael finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Danny, what if it wasn't just lights? What if it was a warning? What if they don't want us telling anyone?" Daniel's hands shook as he lit another cigarette. "Then we keep our mouths shut. We don't talk, we don't ask, and we sure as hell don't go back to the desert." But even as he said it, Michael knew it was already too late. The Mojave had marked them. Whatever had hovered above that barren stretch of sand on September 6, 1997, had left its shadow on their lives. And in the quiet hours of the night, when the humming returned faintly in the distance, Michael wondered if it was only a matter of time before the lights came back. And this time, they might not leave without taking something. Strange lights over the Mojave Desert. The week after the sighting felt longer than any Michael could remember. His days at school blurred together. The sound of children reciting lessons doing little to distract him from the gnawing unease that pressed against the edges of his thoughts. He had always been grounded, the kind of man who laughed at conspiracy theories, who shook his head at tabloid headlines about UFOs. But now, when he looked up at the wide blue sky over the playground, he felt no comfort. He felt watched. At night, sleep offered little rest. He would close his eyes and see the triangle of lights, spinning and reforming in the desert sky, and then the sudden brilliance of that one orb descending until the world glowed white. In his dreams, he was standing frozen in the sand, unable to move, unable to speak, while the shadow he had glimpsed stretched taller and taller until it blotted out the stars. He woke drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled, the sound of his own heartbeat roaring in his ears. Sarah noticed. She tried to ask him what was wrong, but Michael brushed her off. How could he explain if Daniel was right? Telling anyone would only bring trouble, and yet keeping it bottled inside felt like poison spreading slowly through his veins. One evening, just after sunset, Michael sat alone on the porch with a cup of coffee. The neighborhood was quiet, the faint hum of air conditioners carrying through the warm September air. He tried to convince himself it was all in his head, that he was simply tired, stretched thin from too much work. Then he saw it again, down at the end of a street, parked beneath the shadow of a tree, was a dark car. Its windows were tinted, its engine silent. He had seen it before, he was sure of it. Always just at the edges of his vision, always gone the next morning. His stomach tightened. He set his cup down carefully and went inside. That night, when he looked again, the car was gone. Meanwhile, Daniel was unraveling faster. Michael received a call late one Wednesday evening. His friend's voice was hoarse, almost frantic. "They came into my yard again," Daniel whispered. "I swear it, Mike. I saw lights, little ones like sparks, floating between the trees. And I don't even know what I heard. Not voices, not exactly. More like a vibration in my head, like something trying to speak without words." Michael gripped the phone tighter. "Danny, you need to calm down. Maybe it's just..." "No," Daniel snapped. "Don't you dare say it's nothing. I know what I saw. And you know it too. They're not done with us." The line crackled, then went silent. When Michael tried to call back, there was no answer. The next morning, he drove to Daniel's house. The yard was a mess, trash bins knocked over, the gate to the backyard hanging open. Daniel sat on the porch steps with a cigarette burned down to the filter, staring at nothing. His dog was still missing. The field behind the house strangely flattened, as though something heavy had pressed down the grass. Michael sat beside him, the smell of smoke sharp in the morning air. "We can't keep pretending this will go away," he said quietly. Daniel laughed bitterly. "And what do you suggest we do? Call the police? Tell them we saw lights in the sky? They'll think we're drunk or crazy." Michael hesitated. He wanted to say more, to tell Daniel about the black car, about the footprints in his yard, about the humming that had woken him at night. But the words stuck in his throat. A strange dread pressed down on him, as though even speaking of it aloud might invite something closer. That night, the humming returned, louder this time. Michael woke at 3 a.m., his skin prickling. The sound vibrated through the walls, rattling the glass on the bedside table. He stood slowly, careful not to wake Sarah, and crept to the window. The street outside was bathed in pale light. Not moonlight, not the orange glow of the street lamps. This was sharper, wider, coming from directly above the house. Michael's breath caught. He pressed closer to the window, heart thudding painfully in his chest. The light pulsed once, twice, then shifted away, sweeping across the rooftops as if searching. Within seconds, it was gone. The street was dark again. Michael stumbled back, his knees weak. He sat on the edge of the bed until dawn, staring at nothing, unable to close his eyes. The following days blurred together. He went to work, forced himself to smile at his students, nodded politely to colleagues who asked if he was feeling all right. But each night, the humming came closer, sometimes faint, sometimes so loud he was certain Sarah must hear it too. But she never stirred, never seemed aware. It was as though the sound was meant only for him. Then came the night he woke not to humming, but to silence. A silence deeper than anything he had ever known. so absolute that even his own breathing felt intrusive. He opened his eyes slowly. Someone was standing at the foot of the bed, tall, thin, motionless. The room was too dark to see details, but the outline was there, unmistakable. Michael's body froze, every muscle locked. He tried to call out, to move, to wake Sarah, but nothing happened. His chest heaved, yet no sound escaped. The figure did not move. It simply stood there, as though waiting. Michael's vision blurred, his ears filled with a rushing sound, like wind howling through a tunnel. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure was gone. The room was empty. The clock on the nightstand ticked softly in the silence. He sat up, gasping for air, the sweat cold on his skin. Sarah stirred beside him, mumbling in her sleep, unaware. Michael did not sleep again that night. The next morning, he found something scratched into the dirt behind his house. A series of lines, jagged and uneven, almost like symbols. Not letters, not numbers, but something else entirely. He knelt, tracing them with his finger, a chill running down his spine. When he told Daniel, his friend only shook his head. "It's starting, Mike. We should have never stopped that night. We should have kept driving." Michael wanted to believe it was paranoia, that they were both unraveling from lack of sleep and fear. But deep down he knew the desert had not let them go. The lights had followed them, crossing the distance between the Mojave and their quiet homes, slipping into their lives like shadows that refused to fade. And sometimes, late at night, when the humming started again, Michael thought he heard something else beneath it. A whisper, not in English, not in any language he recognized, but it was speaking to him, pulling at him, calling him back to the desert. The Mojave was waiting, and sooner or later, he knew he would have no choice but to return. Strange lights over the Mojave Desert. Michael could not ignore it anymore. The whispering in the night had become clearer, though he still could not recognize the words. Sometimes it was faint, like voices carried on the wind. Other times it was so sharp it felt as though someone was speaking directly into his ear while he lay in bed, paralyzed with fear. Daniel was falling apart even faster. A week after his dog disappeared, he stopped going to work. His neighbors said they saw him standing in his yard at all hours, staring at the sky as though waiting for something to return. Michael visited him often, but every time he found Daniel paler, thinner, his eyes bloodshot, the ashtray beside him overflowing. One late afternoon, Michael drove out to Daniel's house again. The sun was sinking low, staining the desert sky with streaks of red and purple. He found his friend sitting on the porch, knees pulled to his chest, a bottle of whiskey clutched in one hand. "You hear them too, don't you?" Daniel's voice cracked as Michael approached. The voices, they don't stop anymore. Michael sat beside him, the wooden steps creaking under their weight. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I hear something. At night. It's like it's inside my head." Daniel laughed bitterly, the sound raw. "They want us back, Mike. Back where it started. I can feel it. They don't care what happens to us here. We're just loose ends." The words chilled Michael, because deep down, he felt the same. Each night, the pull toward the desert grew stronger. It was as if the Mojave itself had hooked something into his chest, tugging at him with invisible strings. That evening, as Michael drove home, he saw it again, the black car. It followed him for several miles, always 2 lengths behind, its headlights steady, unblinking. When he slowed, it slowed. When he turned down his street, It carried on past without pause, vanishing into the night. By the time he reached his house, Michael's hands were trembling on the steering wheel. He rushed inside, bolted the door, and sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. Sarah asked what was wrong, but once again he said nothing. How could he explain any of this without sounding insane? The next night, the lights came back. It was nearly 2 in the morning when Michael woke to that familiar humming, louder than ever. He sat up, his skin crawling, and pulled back the curtain. Above the neighborhood, hovering silently, was a single white orb of light. It was lower than before, almost level with the rooftops, its glow so bright that shadows stretched unnaturally long across the street. Michael's breath caught in his throat. He tried to wake Sarah, shaking her shoulder, but she would not stir. It was as though she were trapped in some unnatural sleep. The light pulsed once, twice, then slowly, it began to drift toward the desert. Michael stood frozen at the window, torn between terror and an irresistible urge to follow. His body trembled, his mind screamed at him to stay inside. But something deeper, something he could not fight, whispered that he needed to go. The next morning, he called Daniel. "They were here again," he said quietly. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Daniel spoke, his voice hollow. "We have to go back, Mike, to where it started. They won't stop until we do." Michael's stomach turned, but he knew his friend was right. The Mojave was calling them back. 3 nights later, under the cover of darkness, they drove together into the desert. The old Ford pickup rattled down the highway, the headlights cutting a narrow path through the vast emptiness. Neither man spoke much during the drive, but the silence between them was heavy with dread. By the time they reached the stretch of Highway 58 near Barstow, it was nearly midnight. The desert lay still and vast around them, the stars burning cold above. They pulled off the road at the same spot where it had all begun. For a while, nothing happened. The 2 men sat on the hood of the truck, smoking in silence, their eyes scanning the horizon. The desert wind whispered across the sand, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and sage. Then, without warning, the lights appeared, 3 orbs glowing white-blue, hovering just above the horizon. They shifted in formation, sliding smoothly across the sky, faster than any aircraft could manage. Daniel's cigarette fell from his fingers, forgotten, as he stared. "They're here," he whispered. The lights moved closer, growing brighter, until the desert was bathed in a cold, unnatural glow. Michael felt his chest tighten, his breath coming shallow. The humming returned, vibrating through his bones, louder and louder until it drowned out every other sound. And then, just as before, one of the lights broke away from the group and descended. It hovered above the sand, its glow spreading outward, illuminating the empty expanse. But this time, there was no shadow at the edge of Michael's vision, no half-glimpsed figure. This time, the figure stepped forward, tall, thin, its movements slow, deliberate. It stopped within the glow, its outline sharp against the light. Michael could not make out details, but the shape of its head, elongated and smooth, sent ice through his veins. Daniel stumbled back, his voice cracking. "Jesus Christ, Mike, it's real. It's real!" Michael could not move. He stood rooted to the spot, his eyes locked on the figure. The humming intensified, filling his skull, pressing against his thoughts. He felt something pushing into his mind, cold and invasive, as though it were sifting through his memories. He tried to resist, tried to pull back, But the harder he fought, the stronger it became. Images flashed before his eyes. Memories of childhood, of school, of Sarah, all torn through like pages in a book. He gasped, clutching his head, but no sound came out. Beside him, Daniel screamed. Michael turned just in time to see his friend lifted from the ground, his body suspended in the glow of the orb. Daniel's arms flailed, his mouth open in a silent cry, before the light swallowed him whole. And then, just like that, he was gone. The orb shot back up, rejoining the others in the sky. Within seconds, all three lights blinked out, leaving nothing but the cold desert night. Michael collapsed to his knees, the sand digging into his palms. His heart pounded, his breath ragged, his mind numb. The truck stood silently behind him, its headlights casting weak beams across the sand. Daniel was gone. Michael stayed there for hours, staring at the empty sky, waiting for something, anything, to return. But the desert gave him nothing, just silence, endless and suffocating. By dawn, he climbed back into the truck and drove home. He told no one what had happened. Not Sarah, not the police, not even Daniel's family. He said only that Daniel had left town, that he did not know where. But the truth sat heavy in his chest, an unbearable weight he carried alone. At night, the humming still came, louder now, stronger, and sometimes, when he lay awake in the darkness, Michael thought he saw shadows moving at the foot of his bed. He knew the lights would come back, and next time, they would not leave without him. Hari Hari Satila Daniel Mengalang Menjadi Beban Yong Tidak, Pernah Hailong Bagi Michael. Aimen Koba Kembali Karudanitas Mengajar. Tersenium D Hadapan Murid Muridnia. Dan Barusaha Maya Kinkin Sarabawa Semuanya Bake Saja. Naaman Dalam Darinya. Ai Tahu Tidak Ada Yong Normal Lodri. Malam Malam Panjang Pena Dengan Den Gungan Tak Kasat Mata Terrace Datong. Lebi Intens, Lebi Menikin. Sikanakan Semikan Dekat, Sidiap Kali Ae Menkoba Melyapakan. Kadong Ae Turbangan Dengan Tubu Penu Karangat. Kadong Ae Menamukan Pazar Halis D Lontai Kamarnya Meski Semua Jendela Dan, Pintatur Tutup Rapat. Orang Orang D Sekatar, Malay Memper Hadakan Perubahan Darinya. Beberapa Murid Berbizik Bawa Garunya Sering Terminal. Matanya Kosong Minatap Kolangit. Sarah Menkoba Menanangkanya. Naaman Sering Kali Ia Juga Ketakutan Melahat Swaminya Bangun di Tengamalam. Berdiri di Halaman Belakong. Minatap Kosong ku Ara Mojave. Kemudian, pada Swata Malam Tanpa Bintang. Michael Sendiri Mengalang. Tidak Ada Jejak. Tidak Ada Tanda Tanda Perlawanan. Pintu rumah tetap terkunci dari dalam. Hanya ada satu halane yang ditunjukkan oleh Sarah di halaman belakang. Serangkaian simbol tak dikenal. Terstak samar di pasar, melingkar. Sikan membentuk sebuah pola yang tidak pernah bisa dijelaskan. Polisai menyebutnya kasus orang hilang biasa. Tetangga berasumsi Michael lari meninggalkan keluarga Karina tekanan hidup. Tetapi Sarah tahu lebih baik. Ia tahu tentang malam-malam tanpa tidur. Tentang dan ganggan yang hanya bisa didengar suaminya. Tentang tatapan kosongnya ku arah langit yang tak berujung. Beberapa minggu setelahnya, seorang pengemudi truk melaporkan melihat cahaya aneh di langit Mojave. Berputar-putar dengan formasi yang mustahil. Ia tidak tahu kisah Michael. Tidak pernah mendengar nama Daniel. Tapi ia merasakan hal yang sama. Parasan kesel, rapuh, dan diawasi dari ketinggian. Dan hingga kini, di jalur sepi Highway 58. Ada Sarita Yang Baradar Dari Mulet Kumulet. Tentang Kahaya Puti Yang Munkul Tanpa Swara. Tentang Orang Orang Yang Melahatnia. Lala Tak Pernah Sama Lagi. Tentang Marika Yang Barani Minatap Turlala Lama. Lala Tidak Pernah Kembali. Mojave Tetap Dayam. Guruan Lewis Yang Meni Impan Rahasia. Tapi Bagi Marika Yang Tahu Seratania. Langit di Ada Sana Tak Pernah Lagi Hanya Sekadar Langit.